Hey, how are you guys?
Morning.
I want to introduce my friend Jim Gianopulos, who's the head of Paramount Studios. He's clearly behind enemy lines today on the Warner lot.
Oh, right.
No, they're your friends.
friends.
We know. It's interesting. There's a lot of talk about the disconnect between the Valley and Hollywood. Ultimately, I think both are creative businesses.
Sure.
Ones with zeros and ones and codes, and obviously with ideas and images here. And you and I were at lunch the other day, and we were talking about how when you look back at the history of movies, how often movies predict the technology that will come later that wasn't even invented.
Right.
The way we met was I was running MySpace and you were at Fox, and you got the guys to show me some early Avatar clips, and it freaked me out. But when Avatar was brought to you, the technologies to make that movie didn't exist.
Right.
So tell me a couple of stories about working with guys like Cameron where they had to actually come up with the tech to make the movie.
Well, Jim wrote the treatment for Avatar was called Project 880. It was sort of a code name at the time. I think it was 8 or 9 years before he started the movie, and it was really about having the technology catch up. One of the things that's most difficult is to capture facial movement. Motion capture is expanded, but we've all seen things like Polar Express and Beowulf, which were early iterations, and they were great films, but the faces were flat, they weren't quite there yet, weren't believable, and Jim wanted to get to the place where the technology met the imagination and creativity that he brought to the Avatar ideas. And so we did a lot of experimentation and did some early tests with a variety of projects, and eventually it got to the place where he felt comfortable that he had the tech to do it, and actually invented most of it. But a lot of it was a combination of motion capture and rigs that were able to capture the nuance of the face and translate it so that the actor's performance came through those Na'vi faces. And I think the next iteration of that is doing it with humans, and it's tricky because we imprint as children, as infants, on our parents, obviously, and then with each other and the nuances of the way the face moves and those little movements and eyes and eyebrows and smiles and things like that. Those are hard to replicate. And one of the things I learned from Jim is that the face has 144 individual muscles. So all of those.
That's good for poker, right?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
So it's a difficult thing. So obviously it was a matter of the tech catching up, and he had two projects actually. He had Avatar and another one called Alita Battle Angel, and he was trying to figure out which of the two to do. Alita was more of a humanoid character that's coming out. I started that before I left Fox. That comes out this summer. And that's much more of a humanoid character. So the evolution of the technology has gotten to the place where he could do that as opposed to alien life forms as he did in Avatar.
When you were running Fox, one of the great thrills is I get a call from you and say, hey, we have this thing called the Fox Innovation Lab, right, and come over and see it. And I'm a 2-year-old and I like toys. And basically, Jim, along with colleagues like Ted Shalowitz and David Greenbaum, built out a sort of a working area where, AR, VR, all these new technologies we're trying to figure out, and what new kinds of storytelling. And I've always been suspect, specifically with virtual reality, that's where we would watch a movie. And I know you're going to continue that stuff at Paramount. Like, why the Innovation Lab, and are you teaching the directors, or are you just sort of schooling them on the tech and seeing where it goes?
Well, it's a little of both, because obviously the creativity and imagination of storytelling comes from the filmmakers we work with. One of the things we did in AR and VR in the Innovation Lab was The Martian, which I think you experienced.
I did.
Which was a combination of original footage, VR, and Ridley's original footage from the movie, so that it put you in the position of Matt Damon waking up on Mars, and driving a vehicle and doing all that sort of thing. So it is a combination of providing storytellers and giving their imagination the tools to realize new forms of entertainment.
Does that mean that we're going to see something different than just, I don't mean that in a pejorative way, but just movies out of the studio? Like, what are the experiences you're going to create going forward?
Well, that's one of the reasons that I brought Ted Shalowitz over. His title is Resident Futurist, which I thought was a great title. He had that at Fox.
It's a lot of pressure.
It's a lot of pressure. But Ted is exploring all those new technologies and new forms of entertainment and audiences' interaction with content. And it takes a lot of different forms. I mean, one of the things that I think directors have been exploring in VR is the fact that they're no longer in a frame. You know, storytelling has traditionally been in a square and then now in a rectangle, where the audience's attention is directed into a specific area. Obviously with VR, they control the perspective. So how do you tell a story? What different tools do you use? What different ways do you attract attention to different parts of the story that you want to convey? And so that's a new art form and a new tool to explore ways of telling and entertaining.
So how do you have that discussion with a Ridley or a Jim? Because I'll give you an example. I think a company called Jaunt, who does a lot in the VR space, had done something where you could watch Paul McCartney live in concert.
Right.
And we all wanted to be rock stars, and we get up on stage and we're looking at the crowd and we're looking at the drum riser, and then all of a sudden the video cuts, but it's not a cut that I made.
Right.
So when you're in VR, you're trying to suspend disbelief, and you think you have the control. And you know, film is a fallacy, meaning you're putting together and you're manipulating the audience with these pictures and images. That's what a director does. How is giving up control something that a director wants to do?
Well, they still retain the control, but it is back to what I said. You know, when there's a difference between an experiential VR content where you're put in a place, whether it's a concert or another event or an environment, and you can explore it and look around and experience what it would be like to be someplace where you're not in an artificial setting.
Sure.
The other is a narrative, and narrative, I think, is where that's an exploration that still has to evolve. It doesn't mean it can't be done. It's going to, you know, great talent is going to figure it out.
When we see these, you know, entertainment parks, like VR, like The Void and other things, and we hear about Lucasfilm working on real VR experiences that are sort of experiential beyond your home, do you see a world where, you know, one of your movies that are set in these future environments have like sort of another experience outside the theater where you go for the day?
Absolutely. I mean, you know, we build sets and we create environments virtually, you know, in CG. So the ability to take those elements and translate them into other forms is a natural.
So you recently joined Paramount as the head of the studio. You were at Fox with one of the more successful runs I've seen a studio boss make. And obviously Paramount's had its issues before you got there. What's the difference between coming into a new system and trying to fix it versus the momentum of building what you had at Fox? Well,
you know, Fox was, when I started there, and I wasn't running it right in the beginning, I was there for 24 years, but when I first joined, it was in transition. It was coming off of an okay run, but it was a company that, a studio that needed to be renewed. And so Peter Chernin at the time and Bill Mechanic brought in new people, created a new culture, set a new direction and strategy, and we evolved that over the years. So it wasn't overnight. And I think that's true of Paramount. You know, all the elements are there. Paramount's now about to be one of 5 institutions on the planet that is a fully integrated global studio, which is a rare thing and not an easy thing to replicate. So you start with a legacy of 100 years of great entertainment and storytelling and IP and library and all of these global assets, and then you say, okay, well, what needs to be done? So you renew the management, and we've done that. You expand your creative relationships and build on the ones that you have, and we've done that. And then you set a strategy and a goal and a direction and get everybody on the page and then hope the movies work.
And we've talked about this many times privately, but you know, obviously there's been in every business a way we do things, so to speak. It's one of the scary comments you hear when you're trying to make change. And we've talked a lot about creative thinking over you know, our relationship. And that not just creative thinking and storytelling, but like how you market, how you budget. And you have a place and an institution in a town that does things a certain way. Mm-hmm. And I know you want to change, and I know you want your people to change. So how do you make sure that creative thinking and that kind of sort of devil's advocate, you know, colleague relationships happen inside the studio?
Well, you have to. I mean, innovation is the only constant is change. So you start there. Audience tastes change. Their ability to access entertainment in new ways, new devices, new technologies, new business models. That's all constantly changing. So you have to evolve with that. You have to evolve with what interests them, what pop culture is doing, and how that is changing. And so a lot of it is instilling a sense of innovation and risk-taking, and letting people feel like, you know, they can take some chances, they can try some new things. And if they screw up once in a while, well, that's okay too, you know. There comes a point where it becomes a problem, but you have to instill in people the ability to know that they can take some risks and try some new things. Or,
you know, that's not something in this town, you know, someone's got to fail. You're only as, you know, good as the last success sometimes, depending on what you read. The Steven Spielberg doc that I just watched on HBO had a great line from Steven where at 21 years old, he meets Sid Sheinberg. And Sid Sheinberg says to him, I want you to come here to Universal because I will be as supportive of you in failure as I am in success.
Yeah.
And a lot of this audience, we talk about how failure is a must-needed step, though few of them if we can get a direct flight, you know, to success. You know, how does that manifest itself? You know, a movie comes out, you work for years, and in one day you know. It's not, you can't work it after that.
well, no, that's the nature of the business.
So how do the creatives, how do the, you know, your colleagues, your employees really know that they can fail?
You have to instill in them that understanding and reflect it when they do occasionally fail. Movies will always fail. Even the best studios will have their disappointments, things that didn't go quite as well as they'd hoped, or didn't justify the budget, or didn't meet the expectations. I mean, one of the things we always say is that if you take risk all of the time or none of the time, you're going to fail.
Yep.
So you can't just be wildly out there making whatever comes into your head. And if you keep doing the same thing that you've done before, it's going to be boring, the audience is going to react to that, and it's going to fail. So it is finding that level of risk that allows you to take those chances and, you know, hopefully find success.
You know, I see that in a little bit of the superhero movies. You know, this idea that franchises make money and, you know, the sequels become very repetitive. You were behind a movie at Fox called Deadpool, which was a character in the universe that I didn't know, and done it in a very irreverent way that I've never seen a superhero movie done. So what could the other studios learn from not shelling out the same stuff and actually taking a chance?
Well, it's interesting because that came about in what we call a packaging meeting, where we talk about, you know, projects that we're looking at, and we had a group of executives, production executives, and that weekend, Guardians of the Galaxy had opened. And I said, look at these guys at Marvel. I mean, I thought that looked dopey. I didn't think that was going to work. It just seemed so out there. And of course, it was really original and really fun and a great movie. But what we had seen from the early material was, are you sure this is going to work? And I said, they can't do anything wrong over there. And one of my colleagues, Emma Watts, said, you know, the only thing they can't do is an R-rated superhero movie, because that's not Disney's business, or at least wasn't then. And as soon as she said that, I thought, okay, that's going to work. And then we unleashed Tim Miller and Ryan Reynolds, and when we marketed that movie, we took all the controls off the marketing department. I said, I don't want to know, just go do it. And they did, and it was and Brian was a big part of it, but it was an incredibly edgy, cool, out there campaign that reflected the movie, and so it worked.
You know, we talk about innovation and you know, disruption all the time. To me, that was an example. It's not a tech device, but that was an example of taking a genre, thinking I thought I knew what I was going to see when I walk into the theater, and taking chances and not really, you know, giving a fuck, essentially.
Well, yeah.
And I'll say this, if you haven't seen the movie, and I know a sequel's coming up, it's probably the most innovative credit sequence I've ever seen in film ever, with a lot of sense of humor. So
yeah, it is.
Let's turn, you know, again to the movie business. Two things that are bothering me about movies right now is I look at movies, frankly, that you were involved in at Fox, like Three Billboards in Ebbing, Missouri, or Shape of Water. And we hear these things like, you know, the middle's gone, small movies won't be made, it's only about blockbusters. And yet, I've been thinking lately, what if a movie like that didn't get released in the theater and it was on whatever the studio was, their own OTT service? Let's say it was a Disney or a Viacom or anyone else. Is the value of a small movie to adding subscribers to a service like that more valuable than grinding it out in the marketplace where marketing and releasing a film is so expensive?
Well, you're dealing with two things, and both of them are right. One is that
Finally.
Yeah, but well, one of it. The first point is that it does add value to a service like that, an OTT service or any subscription service, because there is an audience for that film that has a very small barrier of entry, which is called a monthly subscription, that would enjoy it. And separately from that, whether it's one of those films or another, maybe a film like Mudbound, which Netflix did recently, might have had a struggle in the marketplace because you're only as good as your Friday night and your Monday morning. And if you can't hold the theaters, or people don't find out about it in time, or the word of mouth doesn't spread quickly enough, those movies may not reach their full potential, whereas on a service like that, they can be discovered. Yeah. Similarly, where films that might be marginal in their theatrical potential are on a service like that, somebody starts watching it. I mean, I don't know, I'm sure you've experienced, I think we probably all have, where you start watching a movie and say, this isn't really that good, and the next thing you know, you've watched the whole thing. Yeah. Well, there's a difference between paying...
That's usually like a meal for me.
Well, yes, okay, so, but there's a difference between paying $15 to have that experience and sitting in your living room.
It was less trouble for you.
It's less trouble, there's less, financial impact, and so you say, well, okay.
And we see this at Netflix with the movie, is it called Bright, with
Will Smith.
Yeah. Supposedly 11, 15 million people watched it. It got panned, but they're already doing a sequel because all that matters is that people watched it.
Right. And the value equation for a pay service versus subscription services to the subscriber is, over the course of a month, did you see a few things you liked? Well, then fine. So you're going to keep paying for it.
Our friend Ted Sarandos, we're both big fans of Netflix.
I knew him before he was Ted Sarandos.
So he's changed his name. Ted, I was interviewing Ted at Sundance one year, and he's given me the spiel about how House of Cards was cast because of data and algorithms, and storylines are affected because of this, genius computer programs that they have. And, I sort of was like, really, Ted? I sort of call bullshit. I know that you guys look at data analytics, but is casting a movie through data or storytelling through data really a reality?
Well, there are two things. In terms of casting a movie, yes. I think you can use data analytics, social media, other sources that you can mine to tell you the relative merits of Brad Pitt or Leo DiCaprio or Jared Leto. You can determine the appeal and the current pop culture value of individual cast members, actors and actresses. What it can't tell you is whether you should make Slumdog Millionaire, because I don't know what algorithm is going to tell you that.
Yeah, and I don't believe the algorithm would have told you that they should cast John Travolta in Pulp Fiction.
Well, there you go. So I think ultimately it does come down to gut instinct, talented insight from the filmmakers and from the studios, and taking some chances. But you can benefit from some of that, but not in terms of defining the stories you tell. That's a little more difficult to do.
One of my idols, as you know, is an old friend of yours, Steve Jobs. And the first time I met Steve, I went to pitch him, telling him that the future was about streaming music. This was about 2003, and I was with my bosses, Tom Freston and Jimmy Iovine, had come with us to introduce us, and he looked at me in front of this big room and he said, "Jason, you seem like a nice guy, but all your ideas are wrong."
I've been there.
Tell us a little bit about your time with Steve, how you met him, and just a little bit of story that we would love.
I did get to know Steve pretty well, became friendly, although I had many experiences when he told me I didn't know what I was talking about. I was an idiot and clinging to outdated models and all of that. But we did enjoy a really good relationship. In fact, I was remembering the other day, when he first came to the studio at Fox to access content for iTunes, we talked about it. He had some ideas. We had some issues we had to resolve. And I walked him out to the front door of the studio with a colleague of mine who was running home entertainment at the time, Mike Dunn. And as we were walking out, he said, "You want to see something cool?" And he reached into his pocket and pulled out the prototype of the iPhone. And he started scrolling across the album covers and showing me all the list of phone numbers and all the apps that he was. And our eyes just went, wide. And so Mike, we walked Steve out. We were both blown away, obviously. And Mike said, "That is the coolest thing I've ever seen. I'm buying that stock tomorrow. And I said, you're right, man, that's right. And of course, went back to work the next day and forgot about it. Mike made millions of dollars. I eventually bought the stock.
That was really
too late.
friggin' stupid.
It was really stupid. So I just, share that with some regret and shame, but there you go.
Buy the stock. Jim Gianopulos.
Thank you very much.